In 1957, Lieutenant David Steves walked out of the California Sierra Mountains 54 days after his Air Force trainer jet had disappeared. He related an unbelievable tale of survival after parachuting from his disabled plane. For almost 3 months, he said he had eaten berries and dug snow tunnels to sleep in. He had seen no one during that entire time, and he finally walked out on his own. By the time he had showed up alive, he had already been declared officially dead, and his story was viewed with much skepticism because during that same time frame, his assigned unit had been sent to the Korean War. Then further search failed to turn up any wreckage. A hoax was suspected, and Steves was forced to resign under a cloud of doubt. He lived for 2 decades, branded as a deserter and a possible spy. One story had him selling the plane to the Russians. Another one had him piecemealing it and sending it to Mexico. But Steves died in 1965. In 1977, a troop of Boy Scouts hiking through the Kings Canyon National Park discovered the wreckage of Steves' plane, and his story was confirmed. His family was issued an apology from the military and was told that Lieutenant David Steves' name was reinstated with honor. One of Steves' friends, Eugene Junit, after the ceremony told the Associated Press, "This is nice, but I wish someone would have believed Dave back then." We have all heard things that are hard to believe. I remember a TV show that was on that was hosted by Dan Aykroyd, and the name of the show was The Unbelievable. He told stories about things that were hard to swallow. And so this morning, I have a question for you. Is it so difficult to blame a skeptical man and to believe him? A man who has been told ultimately unbelievable things, that Jesus, who had been put to death, had come back from the grave. So let's read about this scene that takes place after the disciples had seen the empty tomb. And Sarah's going to come up and she's going to read our story for us today out of John chapter 20, verses 19 through 29.
All right, John 20, 19 through 29. That Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. "Peace be with you," he said. As he spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hand and his side. They were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. Again he said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." Then he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, they are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." One of the disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the Twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me."
Thanks, Sarah. I think we all, to some degree, can identify with Thomas. He was one of the 12 that were handpicked by Jesus as his followers. And like Thomas, there have been many things that we have wondered about, maybe circumstances or your upbringing makes it incredibly difficult for us to believe in God at all. We live in a world that is mostly unbelieving. Or maybe you believe in some kind of God, but this Jesus, being God, being man, dying, raising from the dead? Well, for some people, that's just too much. Too much. But maybe this probably applies to most of us in the church service. But you believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son. But there's an inconsistency sometime between what our lips say and what we believe by our actual lifestyles. We can say we believe, but maybe the deeper question is, does the way we live confirm our belief, or does it confirm our doubt? And don't get me wrong, doubt is a destructive force. It can erode your confidence in ourselves and in God. And since Thomas's doubt is recorded in detail in the Bible, we can go and read. Let's look at where he was and some cases of doubt and how we can reinforce the conviction and articulate it not only with our lips, but also with our very lives. So the case for Thomas. Who was Thomas? We don't know much about him. We remember only some of the mistakes that he's made, forever living down the failure of a blunder in life. And people have been marked by that. Those of you who are baseball fans remember the 1986 World Series, I think, and the name Bill Buckner. So the Red Sox and the New York Mets were playing in a game 6 of the World Series, and the Red Sox were 1 out away from winning the World Series. Mookie Wilson, no relation, Mookie Wilson of the Mets stepped up to the plate, and all the Sox had to do was to get 1 out, and they would win the World Series. So Mookie hit a slow rolling ball down first baseline that should have been an easy out and the end of the game. But Bill Buckner was playing first base. He muffed the grounder, and the Mets scored a run and won the game in the bottom of the 10th inning, and they went on to win the World Series. And even to this day, Red Sox fan would say, the team didn't lose the World Series, Buckner did. And that's what he's been known for. And Thomas, in some ways, is on that same field. But many don't remember that Thomas wasn't the only one to doubt in the disciples. The other disciples didn't accept the resurrection at first. There's a place here that says, when the women came back with the news that the tomb was empty and Jesus is risen in Luke 24:11, they told the apostles what had happened, but the story sounded like nonsense, so they didn't believe it. So sometimes Thomas gets a bad rap, and he is forever labeled as Doubting Thomas. That's how we remember him, just like we remember Bill Buckner. But maybe the reason for that is because we don't know much about Thomas. There's not much about him in the Bible. We do know his name was Didymus, which means the twin. Were it not for the Gospel of John, we would know nothing except that he was one of 12 closest followers of Jesus. But we have 2 snapshots of him that are worth seeing because they help us understand why Thomas reacted the way he did to the claim that Jesus had risen. In the book of John, we hear about the story when Jesus was called back to Jerusalem for his good friend Lazarus, who was really sick. And the disciples were trying to dissuade Jesus from going back to Jerusalem because everyone knew that the religious leaders wanted Jesus dead. That was their goal. So after some discussion, Jesus just simply said that he's going. He's going to Jerusalem. So here we see Thomas once again in John 11:16, and he says this. That's when Thomas, the one called the twin, said to his companions, "Come along, we might as well die with him." And you know what that shows? It shows that Thomas was the kind of person with a pessimistic outlook on life. Can you hear that in his statement? It was good that he was loyal, even to the place of being a martyr. But he was so very negative about the intended outcome. He might have said this, well, obviously he's not going to listen to us. We may as well go with him. But I'm telling you, We're all going to die. Thomas was one of those half-empty cup guys. And that was evidenced by the way some people live too. They live by the Murphy's Law that if something bad is going to happen, it's going to happen to me. And it usually does. In John 14, we see another snapshot of Thomas. And Jesus gives a beautiful speech in John chapter 14. This is familiar. John 14, 1 through 5. Don't be troubled. You trust in God, now trust in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you, and when everything is ready, I will come and get you. You know where I am going. And it was Thomas that said, no, we don't know, Lord. We haven't any idea where you're going. So how can we know the way? Thomas, again, gives us some insight into the man because he had a skeptical spirit. The way that question is constructed literally says, Lord, I do not want you, I do not know what you're talking about. Be more specific about where you are going. It just was not Thomas's personality to accept things at face value. He struggled a great deal with simply accepting Jesus at his word and therefore the promise that was contained in it. And some of us are more skeptical by nature, and sometimes it makes situations difficult. If you are seeking answers here today, I'm thrilled that you're here, and I hope you find them. Many find it hard to accept Christianity, to trust all the promises. But if you have a question, write it down on the back of that blue card that's in front of you today. If you have a question, communicate with us. Drop it in the boxes on the way out, and we'll respond to you about that question. But if you've been walking in the faith for some time and are kind of negative in nature, you have a difficult time experiencing the joy of walking with Christ. But you know what? Nowhere will you find a more positive message than Christianity offers. Nowhere. The message promises people purpose for the present and hope for the future. That's what it is. So if we are like Thomas sometimes, Jesus would say the same thing to us that he did to him in John 20, 27. Stop doubting and believe. Understanding Thomas from these two incidents makes it easier to see why he acted the way he did after the crucifixion. I think it may even explain why he was not there the first time Jesus appeared in that upper room after the crucifixion. We don't know where Thomas was, but I believe based on his character that he made the same mistake that a lot of people do today when they're in a low state of mind, when they're either saddened or they're a little bit depressed. They withdraw from the place and the people that are needed most in their life at that time. I have a tendency to do that. I don't know about you. But sometimes if I'm feeling down or something like that, I just want to be alone. But let's give Thomas some credit. He did not cut himself off completely from the disciples. He was there the next Sunday after Jesus has resurrected. But Thomas's character also shed some light on why he refused to believe what the disciples told him. Thomas was one of those persons that would say, "Show me." Do you know any show me's? Yeah, there's a lot of show me's around. And when the disciples said that they had seen Jesus alive, after Thomas had seen him die, he was basically saying, you expect me to believe that story? No way. Show me. Show me. Remember, this isn't just one person testimony talking to Thomas. It's 10 of his most trusted friends that he spent these years with. You know what I would do what I would have said to him? I would have said, Thomas, are you calling us liars? It's not like just one of us has seen him. And there was Mary and Peter and the two on the road to Emmaus. We are telling you, we've seen him, and he was here in this room. I might have been a little ticked off and frustrated with him. But Thomas remains stubborn and adamantly refuses to believe. But the next Sunday, Thomas is there. He's in the room. And then Jesus arrives, passing right through the walls and the locked doors. But this appearance was specifically for the skeptics' benefit. Specifically, here's what he says. Jesus looks right at Thomas and says in 20:27, he says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." Basically reminding Thomas of what he had said about why he would not believe. So did Thomas actually put his fingers and his hands in Jesus' wounds inside? We don't know. We don't know. Maybe, but this is the only time this story appears in the Bible. But I think, and this is my opinion, that he might have fell on his knees immediately when Jesus spoke those words to him and said in a humble, hushed tone, "My Lord and my God." What a moment between the risen Christ and one of his disciples. Thomas may have been slow to come around, but once he did, there was no doubt about where his conviction laid. So let's look at Thomas for a while, why he doubted, and the cause of doubt. Why did he question this? What was the cause of his skepticism? And why don't we live lives that consistently demonstrate our faith? Let me list for you some of those, and then we'll just talk about some reasons of how they can apply to each one of us. The first one is this: unexplained circumstances. It's human nature for all of us to be skeptical of things we have never seen or experienced. If you are inquisitive and you want to understand how things happen, that's good. Thomas was a pessimist, but before we are too hard on him, let's admit that most of us don't accept supernatural explanation very readily. Those supernatural things are hard to digest. But Thomas was being asked to believe in something that was impossible to him by experience. And many things that we've thought were intellectually impossible 60 years ago are commonplace today. So let's time warp back about 60 years. How many of you would have laughed if someone told you back then that we'd be getting money out of a machine called an ATM 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Or one day you'd be able to shop and do all your banking surfing the net on a handheld computer through your telephone or cable lines or a satellite connection. And we would say, surf what? But all these changes are because of our increased knowledge. And since that's true of our human existence, no wonder Isaiah 40:13 says this: "Who has known the mind of God or been able to give him advice?" God has superior knowledge and power, so anything is possible for him. But because we can't explain it, sometimes we intellectually doubt it. And that's some of those unexplained circumstances. How about unjust suffering? When unexplained suffering happens, like the September 11th tragedy, 2001, or tornadoes hit, or a small child dies, these things shake our faith. Some would ask, how can God be all-loving and all-powerful and allow this to happen? People who begin with a false concept that being a Christian will protect them from all disasters, will be prone to leave the church and forsake their faith when unjust things happen. One thing was for sure, that Thomas believed in Jesus. He had spent years with him. Jesus was the best man he ever met, the Son of God. Yet Jesus had been crucified as a criminal. Thomas's confidence in the justice of this world must have been destroyed. And he was disillusioned, and like us, he doubted. But sometimes when our dreams are crushed, if we can keep our mind on God's great love and the price that he paid for us in sacrificing his Son, eventually we will see him even under unjust suffering. Another reason why we doubt is unhealthy pride. And quite honestly, this might be the primary reason for our doubt. Listen to Thomas's words again in John 20:25. And I don't know exactly what the tone of his voice was or the intensity that he had in his eyes, but here's what he said. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and I put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. You can read that as a pretty arrogant statement in some ways. Thomas was too smart to believe in this craziness. Jesus, back from the grave, come on. We all want to impress others with our sophistication and intelligence. Accepting something that is not rational is not cool. But if you throw the resurrection away, you will have to replace it with something else. And the world has a plethora of choices, but none of them end in eternal salvation. Psalm 10:4 says this, the wicked are too proud. They do not look for God. There is no room for God in their thoughts. And that might be the definition of unhealthy pride right there. The only thing that we're proud of is ourselves. And the last thing on this list that I want to share is that the last cause of death, this might not apply to Thomas here, but it sure applies to all humanity, and that is our unconfessed sin. David knew about that, and he felt that. King David was one of those guys, and he said this, when I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long, in Psalm 32:3. Doubt becomes a convenience when we don't want to surrender to God. And it's much easier to doubt than to change. So maybe today you struggle with some doubt. So let's look what happened to Thomas that brought him back from doubt to conviction about who Jesus was. He had several things right, but by looking at them, we can discover some things to accept and to reinforce our faith. First thing is that Thomas was openly admitted his doubt. You know, sometimes we like to hide doubt. Oh, no, I don't. No, I don't. Yeah, okay, just don't talk to me about that. But it's important to understand that asking questions is not wrong. You know, this is what you're doing. This is what I want you to do. No, this is what we want you to do right here. Honest seekers always ask questions, but they don't just leave them there. Honest seekers investigate, and an honest investigation will reveal the truth. And Thomas had the courage to express his doubt. And if you're going to deal effectively with doubt, we need to articulate it. But remember, it must be expressed honestly and humbly. There's a story of a school teacher who took a second grader to the library to help her learn how to read. The book she chose for the little girl only had pictures in it. So the teacher sat down with the child and said, "Why don't you identify these pictures for me?" And she began, well, that's a house. Oh, that's a man. That's a boat. That's a top. That's a car. And she turned to the next page, and it was a picture of a hatchet. She goes, that's a hammer. Then she turned to the next page, and there was a picture of a hammer. And she went back and forth between the hatchet and the hammer several times, turning the pages back and forth. And then she closed the book, and she looked at the teacher, and she said, you know, we're not supposed to be talking in the library. It's hard to admit when you're wrong. It's hard to admit. But the first step in getting rid of doubt and finding faith is to humble yourself before God. Someone has said that ego is edging God out. Ask questions, but ask honest ones. When we openly and honestly admit, I know I'm supposed to believe, but I have questions, we're on the way to breaking the chains of doubt. It's okay to doubt in the process, but hopefully admitting our doubt and honestly and humbly seeking God will find the answers that we're looking for. But Thomas positioned himself in the right place to find the answers. Thomas was MIA that first time that Jesus appeared after he was resurrected. But it was only when he was in the right place at the right time that his doubt was removed. John 20:26 says this. A week later, the disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. He wasn't there the week before, but he was definitely there with them then. And I can't emphasize this strongly enough. If you want to strengthen your faith, if you want to climb out of the darkness of doubt, you must expose yourself to the light in many different ways. Time after time, I've seen people struggle with their faith, and instead of staying in the light of God's teaching and the fellowship of God's people, they withdraw, and it gets darker. By being gone that first Sunday, look what Thomas missed. He missed out on the fellowship with his friends, the common bond they had that could have strengthened him. And he missed out on the instruction of what Jesus was talking about. What must it have been like to hear Jesus tell about his death and his resurrection? Luke 24:45 says this, then he, Jesus, opened their minds so they could understand the scripture. The next time the disciples got together, Thomas was there. He wanted to believe, and Jesus appeared, and what did he say? He said, Thomas, you cynic, you pessimist, I don't have any more need for you. No. He was very patient with the honest seeker. And he said, come, touch the nail prints, my side, and don't be faithless, but believe. If you want to have a strong faith, you must be willing to honestly investigate the truth. The other thing Thomas did right was to articulate his faith. He said as he surrendered himself to the living Christ, my Lord and my God. And with those 5 words, he was saying it's true. It's true. But notice that he said it out loud. He said it out loud. You know, I don't know about you, but I'm not a mind reader. And I need to use language with other people to know what they're thinking. One way to reinforce our faith is to express it in the presence of others. And Thomas did that because he realized he didn't have all the answers, but Jesus did. So he surrendered his intellect, he surrendered his skeptical spirit, he surrendered his pride, everything that he had, and he found the resurrected living Christ. That's who Jesus found when he did that. So I just have a question today for all of us. What do you need to surrender? What do you need to surrender? John finishes this chapter by clearly giving the purpose for telling what happened to Thomas. In fact, it's the reason for this whole book. It's in John 20:31, end of this chapter. It says, "These things were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name." In 1963, Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He said he dreamed of racial equality, and sometimes that's all the people hear when they hear that speech. But he also said that he had faith in God. He said, "With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. And with this faith, we'll be able to work together, pray together, struggle together, knowing that one day that we will see Jesus and we will all be free." He said, "I have a dream." That's why these incidents were written for us to read today. That's why Jesus rose from the dead. But these things have been written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And that's no dream. That's the reality, and that's the truth. And isn't it time, like Thomas, to say, "My Lord and my God"?